today we're going to discuss about how will open source play a role in the evolving 5G ecosystem. I would like to thank InterDigital for organizing this panel. And I will introduce all the panelists. Okay, sorry for starting late. So we'll start from the far left. And that's Fred. So Fred Schreider is working for InterDigital and is a senior director at InterDigital. Over 20 years working in wireless communication. And you have been responsible for many things. So I don't want to develop too much about what you have done, but what is important is you are heavily involved in open source, in 5G, so you're the perfect expert for this discussion. And then we have Arpit from the Linux Foundation. So Arpit has been working for more than 30 years. He's working for Linux Foundation, technical dev, business breadth. He's the general manager of the networking, edge, and IoT. Then we have Chih-Lin. So you're working for China Mobile. We can see you on many panels, always talking about ORAN, open source. That's very interesting because you're working for network operator. So here I'm pretty sure you will have a lot to say. If I have to just cite one thing, in addition to working for China Mobile, you have been studying at Stanford University some time ago. And then we have Manu Abhimanyu Gosain. Okay, Manu is technical program director at the PAWR project in North America at the Northeastern University. And you are, in addition to working on open source on the OSA, what is important here is the OpenAirInterface Software Alliance. So I know we will use a lot of acronyms. Please make sure that you try to develop the acronyms because maybe not everybody knows. And then we have Raymond. So Raymond is working for the OSA. Okay, you are the president of the OpenAirInterface Software Alliance. You have been studying in Switzerland sometime. And we'll get started. So the way it will be working today is we'll try to focus for 40 minutes on the discussion, exchanging. I will ask some questions, interjecting, discussing openly. We will not be talking about licensing. That's not the goal here. I will not be talking about patents. But here at Mobile World Congress, we can see 5G everywhere. That's impossible not to talk about 5G. So that's very important. And then we have seen that within 5G, you have a lot of applications. So that's coming from different developments. And open source is starting to play a role in this ecosystem. So if we start with Chih-Lin, I would like to ask you the first question. What, in your view, are the challenges for the mobile network operator facing, which is driving the radio access network to be more open today?
I think the question could be phrased in both opportunities and challenges together. We all have a great expectation and dreams about what 5G era should be, right? Our life as a whole society would be enabled and transformed. But in order to really get that dream realized, I think our whole industry needs to work together to find a really win-win-win and a sustainable future together, because we cannot ignore the fact that there has been some unhealthy trend that's happening with our industry, particularly with operators, I would say, probably with the major vendors as well. But like I think any industry, there's always ups and downs. And while this pressure is upon us, we do see that we are also facing a great brand new opportunity where, like what we like to say, that finally we are at a point where we will see true deep convergence of IT, CT, and DT. ICT deep convergence is truly upon us, and there's a lot of opportunities, but a lot of challenges. And we have to be open-minded. We have to make our system open. We have to enable more players to join our ecosystem by being open, not only with open interfaces, open APIs, but also make great use of open source community power as a great asset for us together.
Okay, so I hear collaboration, openness, but then I would like to jump for Pete, because I said the radio access network has to be more open, but what about the rest? I mean, edge, core, everything has to be open, or how does it work?
All right, so let me first say, this is a 142-year-old industry, right? It was never open since the phone was invented. In just the last 3 years, we have completely transformed from a walled garden to an open architecture, right? And open is at all layers. Data plane layers, you know, if you take logical architectures, data plane, control plane, automation, analytics, APIs. If you take the physical network, core, edge, and access, the core of the telecom network has already spoken, right? The majority of the operators. So at the Linux Foundation, we host a project called ONAP, which is an open network automation platform. The participation rate with the operators is about 70% of global subscribers, you know, represented. So by de facto, operators have spoken that they're going to use open source software to automate their 5G networks before 5G hits. That same mechanism, and it's in deployment. I mean, China Mobile is a very active participant and contributor to that. AT&T, Vodafone, Orange, Verizon, Geo, you know, you can just keep on naming. That same open source movement is now happening at the edge. So we have initiatives under the LF called LF Edge, where we are bringing multiple edge projects under open source together and foster collaboration with software. And then test hardware and software together in an open manner, right? That same learning now is ready for access, okay? And then with 5G and Open RAN, we are working collectively in the community to figure out what is the best governance, what is the best structure, legal and IPR, and what is the best solutions technology-wise as open software and open hardware come together. Because at the end of the day, nobody can beat shared IP and collaboration. Not a single vendor is smart enough and has hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D to create this ecosystem. You know, gone are those worlds where it's like, you know, Nortel was an AT&T, or, you know, 2 or 3 people were running the voice show. They're gone. Okay, collaboration is king. And RAN is the focus now.
Okay. I would like to ask a question to Manu and Raymond, because, you know, you're presenting the OpenAirInterface Software Alliance. So we can hear that there is a need of cooperation. There is this very successful 3GPP technology that has been developed the last 30 years, but you guys have created something to help both worlds to communicate, to work together. So you have enabled actually this cooperation. So can you talk about what you are doing at the OSA?
So today, OpenAirInterface, really what it's about is innovation, is driving innovation. And at the same time, addressing what Arpit was just saying, doing it in such a way that is gentle with respect to the ecosystem, and respecting the ecosystem. Today, what we try and put forth is a collaboration model, which allows big players to come in, work with the software in their labs, and at the same time, preserve their intellectual property. I mean, that's really the key thing about what we're doing.
I'll maybe take this a little bit differently. Go into the hardware specs. So if you really look at the radio access network and you break down what a radio is built out of, And I'm doing a little bit of a deeper dive here. So if you look really at the RF chain from the ADCs, the DACs, to the baseband, to the processing, there are giant, it's still a walled garden. So just to use the common phrase, what we're trying to do from a perspective of building a common hardware platform, I think we're sort of really taking the lead, and it's not just under the purview of the OSA, but we're taking this, at least in the US perspective, as a public-private partnership between industry and academia is sort of usually a forgotten child when we start talking about standards, openness, etc. But from the perspective of hardware, we're really seeing that there is the industry and the academia world really want to bring together sort of a Lego-like approach, where today, if a vendor or an operator wants to build a radio access network, they are sort of have to work with it's a sole source. You have to work with one particular vendor, and that's a pain point she can probably address too. But what we're trying to do is open that ecosystem in the form of having different swappable hardware components, where you essentially bring a bigger community together to essentially, open the ecosystem, grow the ecosystem, and bring new players. In the last couple of years, just within ORAN, there have been multiple startups, SMEs, that have entered the ecosystem, which would not have been possible 5 to 7 years ago. So we were seeing an increasing trend, but that was sort of the hardware perspective. I know we've heard the software one, just wanted to throw that in as well. So hoping for some reactions there.
I don't know if I can add on that. Actually, totally agree, because if you're familiar with the ORAN Alliance that we have launched, from the first day, we said that we are going towards from green and soft to open and smart. And of course, each of these keywords has tremendous implication of what it means. But when we talk about open, we said open source, open interface, open API, but also open reference design, and AKA white box. White box has been I think a hot term that people have kind of very polarized impression or opinion about it. Some, I believe, has misinterpreted what white box means. Really, white box is not just one version. It's not just x86 plus some other software. White box can take, just like what Manu said, different versions. For example, you could have a reference design for a smart RU, okay, where primarily you'll have hardware's components, modules identified as a enabling starting point for tier 2, tier 3 players, even academics who wants to have a lower entry barrier to get into this ecosystem. And then you can add on from that open reference design your own secret sauce, your own special value, and your own differentiation. So open really is an idea from system to software to hardware, all regards.
Hey, I would like to ask you a question, Fred, because here, okay, I hear openness, the collaboration, but what about the complementarity? As InterDigital, you are contributing to standards, you are a strong IP owner, you are also contributing to the open source world. So how is this complementarity working?
Well, it's very complementary to what we do. We're a research and development company, so that's primarily what we do. And we need open source to create our open platforms that we can then allow the ecosystem to use. So we're involved with the National Science Foundation Power Organization, and it's all about bringing universities and research institutions together. And so an open source is a very big component of enabling these test beds to perform and to be shared and opened. So we strike a balance between going to 3GPP meetings and being representative there and contributing actively to the standards, but we also are now embarking in this new area of open source where we're also contributing in this way. So I think they're very complementary.
Yeah, and I can also complement that by saying this, RPA and us, between Linux Foundation and the ORAN Alliance, hopefully in less than 2 months, a month or two, will have some great news, I think, represent as historical accomplishments, bringing 3GPP centric community together with the open source Linux Foundation community together, where, like hinted a bit earlier, that we are working on, I would say, very carefully a clever hybrid arrangement of IPR licensing arrangement, even when it comes to the ORAN open source community under Linux Foundation, where we will address the most challenging piece of our network. Because when it comes to open source Apache 2.0 type of arrangement, it's a lot easier when it's probably a higher layer applications or orchestration, management, etc. But when it comes to the RAN, that is where the most precious, heavyweight 3GPP essential IPs reside in. We need to provide sufficient accommodations for the IP owners to feel comfortable to join this open source movement, to not only benefit from the open source community's power and capability, but also feel well protected with a fair arrangement of their IPR ownership. So actually, I want to use this opportunity to talk to the OC. OC? Is it OC?
OSC.
OSC, yes. The OSC colleagues to understand that the definition of open source needs to be more generalized.
Yeah. So I'll add a very simple statement, right? Gone are the days where we think open source equal to free. That's not telecom, right? That's 20 years ago with a completely different movement. What we have done at the Linux Foundation in terms of core and edge is we have established governance and policies and practices that foster collaboration based on the need of the project, right? And as we move into different areas of the network, as we move into different areas of technology, telecom is one. You know, we have projects in blockchain, we have projects in automotive, we have projects in, we host Kubernetes, right? So, that's the largest project on the cloud. All of them have different requirements. And our view is, if the governance is set up properly, then you get the best of both worlds. And that's kind of what we are working towards.
Maybe, Manu, I have a question because you were involved in North America with this public-private partnership. What was the key of using the OSA and the new license, which is open source, that your organization has created some time ago? Was it like helping to create this communication between the different entities, promoting this complementarity? How helpful it was?
Yeah, so again, for OSA, I think the OSA has done a fantastic job in the last decade or so to bring different disparate stakeholders who didn't speak a common language. And we essentially jumped on the bandwagon. They did the hard work, we just leveraged it. From our perspective, what we really seek to do is to really start at the inception. And the biggest inception, everything that you see around here is all built from basic fundamental research. So what we wanted to bring that public forum from the academics, the researchers, who essentially look at open source as their entry point into this big giant ecosystem where there are big players, there's big technology, a basic understanding of at the first level is done at open source. Nobody can afford a closed proprietary solution. And if we don't open the ecosystem, you're not going to grow the ecosystem. You're not going to get the workforce. You're not going to get student development. So we had that mandate as well, coming from a Science Foundation perspective in the US. But from the OSA perspective, we just saw that this was a playground where essentially academia and industry were interacting really, really well. So just leveraging it and sort of shining a light on that and just running with it, that's sort of been our mandate here.
Ray, because you are the core of Euricom, who was the entity created, actually, who has created this license. I understand that there is one way to help all the communities to build, to really test, to facilitate the deployment, but that's mainly about testing, trialing, when the specifications are moving in the STARS committee? How do you see this complementarity?
Well, I mean, the complementarity with 3GPP is very clear. At least in the phase of the evolving standard, you have the study item phase. And during that phase, typically the different vendors are doing their simulations and trying to come to the best consensus about the procedures that are going to go into the standard. If in parallel you have a community that is actually testing these things more or less in real time with the 3GPP, you're driving the innovation cycle. And I think what's very interesting from this perspective is if you have a community that actually also includes high-end academic institutions, you have the potential for having very new ideas coming very quickly into the standard automatically through the community. And I think that was one of the reasons behind, fundamental reasons behind what we were doing at Eurocom at the very beginning, and why we wanted to be gentle with the system, because we want to be part of the system. And today, universities, sadly, are not really part of the system. It's a one-way communication channel. Today, the big companies, they're able to see all of the work that's happening in academic circles through publications, through other types of things, but there's no, so they can benefit from that and bring that into the standard, but there's no even indirect method for a high-end academic institution to have impact on the standard, and that's where open source can really help.
Okay. Fred and then Arpit.
I also agree that the importance of having test beds and reference designs is complementary to the standards process. So it's a full circle from specification to reference designs, and then testing this, and then feeding back into the standards and feeding them back into the to the specification. So I think it's very complementary, and test beds, test platforms and reference designs are very important in order to advance and move the industry very, very quickly forward. So this ecosystem, I think, is changing in 3GPP, where it's not just going to be writing specs, but there's going to be software that are reference designs that are used to feed the standard. It's not obviously there yet, but I think it has to evolve that way.
Yeah, so the good news is in open source, there are projects like OPN Fe that, again, China Mobile, AT&T, Orange, huge fans of. They are test automation projects where you're testing hardware and software, standards and open source, all under use cases, and getting ready for deployment, automated test scripts, right? So the good news is, in that whole project, there is tremendous support from universities like UNH, for example. We have some Stanford work going on, etc. I have a theory why universities missed, and I agree with you. And the theory is, in the last 25 years, there was nothing to learn in networking. All you need to do is get a Cisco CCIE certification on how to operate a router, and you're done. You can't see the guts of the system. There's nothing to learn. On the voice side, it was Bellcore, and you learn the TR specs, and you're done. That whole shift to openness, where SDN came in, NFV came in, virtualization came in, there's a whole new set of courses, right, that both Linux Foundation has set up as training courses to retool that staff, and universities are getting back in because now they're seeing that there's a tremendous scarcity of DevOps type people. There's tremendous scarcity of just people who can code in the new telecom world, right? So now is the opportunity for university, but I completely agree with you. There's nothing going on.
Universities, research institute, together with the whole industry chain, from the chip to module to software, hardware, equipment, and to operators, all have very important role to play in this new endeavor that we should be undertaking together. In terms of testing integration, that is definitely a very important consideration, especially going forward. We are going towards a new world of disaggregated network, basically. Even the RAN, we all know that 5G's reference architecture calls for CU, DU, RU to begin with. In addition, in O-RAN Alliance, we are bringing in RIC, the RAN intelligent controller at very different, several levels, the non-real-time level, the near real-time level, and even the real-time level, to integrate with the already disaggregated RAN architecture. So all these pieces adds in tremendous new capabilities, intelligence, flexibility. It also potentially bringing a lot of complexity and a lot of challenges in end-to-end integration. So OPN Fe has been really a platform we've been active in, like RP said, concerning SDN and NFV, virtualization, all of these new technologies. However, I think the final brave frontier is in the RAN. The RAN part remains to be the most challenging pieces, even on that platform. Now, in addition, with the forthcoming open source community that ORAN is partnering with Linux Foundation to set up, there will be not only the RIC intelligent pieces, as well as the 3GPP centric CUDU pieces. There will also be integration end-to-end testing pieces, where we believe that it also will have to involve multi-level of efforts. First, of course, pure software level, the release engineering and management, integration testing, and the Linux Foundation typical level. But then from there on, to go into a really commercializable, deployable product in the real network, we have to also go through compliance, conformance, interoperability, and even beyond validation, you will have to have a hardening test, stress test, right? And all of that before you can get into a specific operator's own requirement and productization and customization level. All of this, I believe, calls for a new joint effort to set up, building upon maybe some of the test bed Mano is setting up, some test bed that OAI, OSA has, and also some of the programs that Linux Foundation have. We believe we still need new resource setup. And that's also another aspect that ORAN Alliance Steering Committee is working on. Basically, currently we are already in communication with multiple potential partners in figuring out how to enable a globally available, every region has a reasonable coverage capability for the new solution. And so I think there's a lot of excitement that we can look forward to.
Before giving the floor to Fred, I understand that some startups, development organizations are also embracing open source. Some open source organizations are also developing projects. We can see that some organizations are actually competing on developing open source specific parts, like the HCOSM. There is a similar activity within the Linux Foundation. So competition is even happening between open source projects, which is good, you know. But I would like to ask a question to Fred. We can see a trend, this transformation of, you know, it used to be like everything done in open standards organization, okay? How do you see this transformation happening from a concrete point of view, as a vendor, as an innovator?
Yeah, it's very collaborative, and I think you see the trends already happening. We saw that the network become very much like a data center, and the vision of making the RAN sort of the same ideal, using very commodity hardware and open source code to open interfaces. So we're trying to make the RAN be very flexible, very, very manageable from a centralized controller point of view. So I think lessons learned from SDN and NFV and applying this now to the RAN is sort of what I think Chih-Lin was explaining, how the challenges in the RAN are going to be even harder than it was in the network because of the interference. You'll have dense cells that you have to manage interference. So I think this is a good time to be talking about RAN in general, and millimeter wave is also coming in 5G. And we know those problems with interference are going to have to be solved, and it'll be even more denser cells. So I believe that this is the right way to go about it. Have these test beds be the starting ground to be testing these new concepts. So I think it's exciting.
Good place. The data center analogy is a good place to start, but I think there is something that we need to keep in mind, that comparing to a traditional data center, our network is really a hierarchical combination of various scale of data centers. And also we have really the geographic physical spreading that a simple data center does not have to address. And in addition, in the RAN, like Fred alluded to, the physical layer challenge, the physical channel is the most challenging media that I think this day you have to deal with end to end in the whole network. So there's a lot of special requirement in terms of capacity and real-time requirement, given you still have a physical spread and also multiple user, multiple cell, all of this interference that you have to deal with. So we are getting there, but the job is not done. There's a lot of work ahead.
If I may just build on a point Dr. Yejim, you made. With 5G, it's opened the door across industry verticals, and it's brought players to the table that weren't really monitoring the telecom space before that. What Testbeds and what a open source ecosystem allows is a neutral playing ground for these sort of different disparate entities to come together. It allows people to sort of look at what other people are doing in a neutral environment, which is quite important. And open source sort of takes that away. You leave all the baggage at the door. You come into an open source project, you come into an open source test bed, and basically you start afresh. So innovation is the key there. Also, another piece, you mentioned intelligence. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, distributed learning, whatever you want to call that, that's a completely altogether different discipline that's now going to be embedded in the telecom sector, in the telecom space going forward, including in 5G in the later releases. That's something that still needs to be explored in standards bodies. So just coming back to how that cycle moves, from the ideation stage to a proof of concept to testing, you essentially need a neutral open source testbed and ecosystem to sort of grow the ecosystem and bring different disciplines in, from the industry side as well as from the automation and artificial intelligence side at each layer.
Completely agree. I mean, for many, many decades, we've been talking about ICT convergence. And finally, we are doing true ICT convergence now, because I think the 90s or the early 2000s, the so-called convergence has been superficial, only in words, but not in action. Now we are really doing the true convergence. But simultaneously, there is this relatively young track, the data technology, the data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. This become a important third component. So IT, CT, and DT are going through different convergence together. And for our network, I think in the core, with the 3GPPs, and what was that called? There was a NWDA functionality introduced in the core network. Already are thinking about how to bring intelligence through the core network. But in the RAN, where we are right now starting the matching effort, because it really needs to be end-to-end. That's why we have this key component called RAN Intelligent Controller, RIC, in O-RAN Alliance architecture, and bring this intelligence in together with all of the new technology that we're going to use by a partnership with the open source community and also the traditional ecosystem. I think we'll be able to accelerate and actually get expertise from many different domains. In terms of, I think, our dream of the future network, I would like to describe it like, eventually it will be like a living and breathing organ. The network knows automatically where and when use the minimum required resource and give the best necessary user experience, whether the user is an individual like us or a particular vertical industry. I think that's the ideal network in the future, but to get there, we have to go step by step, and that will involve the standard body, involve open source community, and involve the experts in the data technology. And personally, I feel that the way that SDO, Standard Development Organization, including 3GPP, will be greatly impacted their mode of operation, I think in a positive way. Not that the rigorous work from standard body should be sacrificed, but I think the speed, the pace will be enabled greatly enhanced by the open source capability and bringing intelligence in the network.
Yeah.
How do we do that? I think we still have to work to figure out, but I see the opportunity there.
No, so I think I completely agree because, standards and open source are kind of technically the opposite end of spectrum, or historically used to be, right? Very slow, very rigorous, very fast, kind of incomplete. And I think we have met halfway, and that's why the cycle is much faster. It's not as close to this cloud model where you have a 2-week sprint DevOps model where you can consume code, but it is not also 18 months to upgrade a single, NIC on a card with some basic software. We've come nicely to a 6-week, 6 months kind of a window. Now, the key here that I want to emphasize, and the reason why this has been so successful, is anything that is plumbing or lifecycle management, take it off the table. Let open source solve it, and we have already solved it. I don't want 5 VNF vendors to come up with a different way of loading, booting, downloading, upgrading, logging. Why, right? That adds complexity to China Mobile, right? Oh, this vendor does it this way, this way. That's plumbing, that's lifecycle management. Get those complexities out of the way. That's 80% of the OpEx in terms of daily operations, right? The hard part where you're talking low-level air interfaces, lots of innovation, let standards work that out, okay? And we collaborate so that you can effectively come up with an end-to-end solution, right? And then all the innovation on the top is through APIs that are, again, standard-based, through forums like TMF, F, whatever, right, Etsy. And let innovation happen on top. You plug in. So there's room for standards, innovative vendors, and open source. And the way I look at it and how the market has evolved is, and I hate to call myself plumber, but the boring part of software is what we do. But that's 70% of the hard work that they have to do. That's what's getting, the traction.
Then I would like to ask a question to Ray, because thanks to the creation of OSA, you have many universities. So the academic world joined the OSA. Do you see, thanks to this project, more contribution coming from universities to Etsy, to 3GPP, or they are just using what has been created and then, developing, working on more like proactive activities for the next generation?
Today, not. Today, I don't see yet any real contributions from what we're doing inside the standard. But that is actually the intent. And I think working together, we will understand the vehicle to get there. The discussions that we have with Linux Foundation, with big companies, with standards organizations, it's making our ideas clear in terms of how you can actually make that happen. And I think if we manage to start doing it already for the 5G or the second phase of 5G, that will be great. But when it comes to the next generation, that's where we really have to see it happen.
Okay. I just wanted to follow up on that. So yeah, with OpenAirInterface, you're going to see a lot of small companies getting into the mix now. It's exciting because then you're going to see innovation happen and explode. Instead of having just the big guys controlling everything, small guys are going to come in, and there's a lot of challenges, right? You talked about the radio access controller. It's almost to me like what's happened in the network with the SDN controllers, and you can actually see that happening in the RAN. where you have a centralized controller take care of all the control plane and then managing the resources below. So this is all groundbreaking and all new, and small companies are going to create these technologies that are going to be incorporated into the standard.
Quick answer.
And I think it's very important.
Many experts in the communication industry have not been necessarily great coders in the open source community, whereas the experts, the code developers in open source community has not really been a great experts in our domain, our industry. So I think Raymond's team in OAI actually represent one of the pioneering group that actually try to marry the open source practice with our industry's domain expertise very closely, and I think they have done a great job there. So I believe that there will be close partnership figured out between OAI and OSA and ORAN Alliance in this regards.
To complete something?
Yeah, I just wanted to step back a little bit and highlight a little bit the importance of these kind of activities for small companies. This is a very difficult industry for a small company to get in. And if you have a piece of software that you could run on a white box radio, let's call it that, that will allow smaller companies to jumpstart into this industry and to innovate perhaps in new vertical applications, in different use cases that maybe 3GPP hasn't thought of. It will allow smaller companies, really to give them a head start so that they can get into this difficult industry.
I just address we're talking about 5G, and I think by design the conversation steered towards 95% of the coverage, which is in larger areas. Open source really also brings the rural community into play, that last mile 5%, where an operator needs a business case or maybe doesn't have a business case yet to actually reach out to that community. You now are going to look at open source, open interfaces, open APIs to lower the barrier of entry for an SME to maybe fit in there. So that's sort of another important piece. We always have to look at the complete picture, and it's not, 5G is going to sort of make and break economies. It's sort of going to be a digital currency. It's going to be a competitive advantage for nations that have it that don't. But don't forget about that last 5%. And from a mobile network operator perspective, that's another key thing to monitor what's happening in the open source ecosystem, to leverage some of that to apply to that last 5%.
Need to make a slight modification on that. I agree, probably globally there are such differentiation in terms of the last 5%, but for our company, we have to cover our population 99.9%. So we actually, doesn't matter whether you're in Himalaya or somewhere out there in the desert area, as long as there are residents, there's population, we have to cover them. But of course, that's not to take away the importance of benefiting from open source capability. And there was talking about competition. Actually, I always view the open source community as a friendly competition and much more collaboration community. And I'm hoping by getting more integrated with our industry, you won't change that nature. And you will still maintain the good nature of being much more cooperative than being competitive.
So we are going to open the floor for questions, but I just would like to raise one important point is in EDC, 30% of the members are SMEs. So EDC is wide open for SMEs. They can contribute. They can then contribute to 3GPP and directly participate to the creation of the standards. Do we have any questions coming from the floor? That's an opportunity. No questions. Maybe I have one again. That's related to the this collaboration that we have. We can see that many organizations have already started collaborating. The question is, if the open source tries to go faster than the standard, we can then imagine that they will try to contribute, or their work may influence the standards. But as said by Chih-Lin, the standardization is creating something very stable. It has to cover 99.99. It has to provide emergency services, etc. So it must be extremely stable and
So this is a very simple solution. It's not that complex, right? So the philosophy that we have when we started the collaboration between open source and open standards is very simple. If a standard exists, code to it. If it does not exist, code it and push it upstream. And that's the loop, okay? And it's the hard part of that is not the developers. They know what to do. The hard part is the lawyers, okay? And so what we have done is we have worked with the legal system, both at the end user, at the vendors, the organizations, the standards organization, ETSI, TMF, MEF, name it, and created a framework where the developers don't have to worry about this, right? They have the right directory structure on where to put code. They have the right licensing structure. They have the right tools to educate themselves on that. So once that happens, it gives two advantages, right? The standard bodies can immediately get that feedback loop that is this standard even going to be working? That loop is very important. You can't write, I've been in standards so long, you cannot write standards in the abstract. And the open source group, right, they want their code to be the de facto standard. And you can't just have de facto standard in code and not document it. And so pushing it back allows them to, do that two-way collaboration. Now, the speed at which this cycle moves is different. The higher layer of the stack, you're moving very rapidly. The lowest layer of the stack in the air and optical layers, right, you're moving very slowly, and you want to move slowly. You don't want chips to come out every 2 weeks in a CI/CD manner. That's not going to work. So I think the industry has figured it out. Collaboration is happening, all right? 5G is a great catalyst to pull us all together. My take to the audience and everybody who's listening is solve the problems that are independent of 5G right now. Plumbing, automation, governance, right? OpEx-related stuff. That retool your network engineers. All these things we have to do. Let 5G come when it comes with the handsets and all that, and a whole new set of innovation. But there's a lot of work to be done now, and we are doing it, and I'm really excited about the next, 6 months.
I think no one can say better than Arpit. He really got to the core of what we are looking for, the combination or the impact of bringing open source community to the standard body. In the sense that if we think our traditional CT industry, we are performance first, performance, right? How many nights we want. So our standard body has to be so careful, so rigorous, and so sometimes slow. And open source community being the IT industry's central play, it's function first, right? Function. Who cares about performance in the beginning? Let's have new function, and we will real-time retune, have new release because it's software, right? To improve its performance. So these two genes, the performance first, function first, gets together. We hope to get the benefit of both. So that's kind of, so there is not a one-way upstream, downstream from standards to implementation writing code. There is really an iteration and continuous cycling and feedback.
We're about to close. I would like to invite you to see the complementarity, timing, technology, everything is working. We have everything in place to make sure that the success in the future of 5G. So I would like to thank the panelists for your intervention and the great discussion.